Were you surprised how quickly American withdrawal happened from
Yeah,
South End?
absolutely. I mean, it was so quick, and I think this sort of speaks to a lot of the failings of, intelligence and everything that was sort of happening on the ground. So when I was there that week, before it fell, I was flying to Mazar, and under the invitation of General Jostrom, who was, supposedly there with these troops, holding back the Talibs in the sort of Uzbek area. And I spoke to officials that I knew in the Ministry of Intelligence, the MOD, and they said, yeah, of course, it's going to be safe. There's no way that, that particular pocket's going to fall. Kabul's never going to fall. Because at that point some of the provinces had, but they were very much adamant that it's fine. And so I went about my business, and really right up until a couple of hours before it fell, they were still telling me the same thing when I, started to become very concerned because, I could see what was happening on the ground. I could see people fleeing. I could see people, they were lining up at the banks trying to get their money out, doing whatever they could to orchestrate a way out of there and try to head toward Kabul as sort of a last resort, because Mazar fell the day before Kabul. It was the Saturday, Kabul fell on the Sunday afternoon.
Oh,
And
really?
so,
Did Mazar actually fall before Kabul?
yeah,
So it kind of came
yeah,
from
it did.
north down to
Yeah.
south.
Yeah, Kabul was pretty much, I guess once Kabul fell, it was all over. But, so that was the Saturday, and I remember, and everything was shut, and you have a feeling, what's going on, and people weren't sort of returning my calls, and it was just, you could sense that things were bad, and things were shifting very fast, and right up until a couple of hours before that happened, which was sort of early that evening, I mean, I was still being told the same thing, oh, you're fine, you should be able to make it on your flight, which was Monday. My flight, of course, that was cancelled straight away as the second it fell. But, so it just sort of spoke to me about the lack of coherence, or the lack of a willingness to really look at the picture, maybe, and assess things accurately. So, it was all very fast, and certainly, much quicker than I expected. By a long shot.
The following is my conversation with Hollie McKay. Hollie is an independent journalist, a war crime investigator, and an author based in Washington, D.C. Hollie has worked on front lines of various major conflicts and war zones, and reported on humanitarian and diplomatic crises in locations such as Pakistan, Afghanistan, Iran, Iraq, Turkey, Saudi Arabia, Burma, Ukraine, and Latin America. In the summer of 2021, Hollie was one of the few journalists left behind in Afghanistan to witness the withdrawal of the US forces and the subsequent takeover by the Taliban regime. She was the last remaining American journalist inside Afghanistan as she witnessed the first 4 months of the new government. She subsequently moved to Ukraine to cover the build-up and subsequent invasion of Ukraine by Russian forces. In this conversation, I discuss with Hollie the current situation of Afghanistan and the challenges faced by the government and the people of Afghanistan. This is a Kianistan Podcast. You can find us on all the usual podcasting platforms. Support us by subscribing and liking and sharing our feed. Thank you, and now let's get started. Hollie McKay, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Excellent. Hollie, so tell us, you're a journalist, war correspondent, an author, a mum, and then you also have people like me harassing you for interview times. How do you manage to cope with everything? How do you manage your time?
Oh, I don't know. I think, we use the word cope loosely, right? I think, time management is always a challenge. It's just always a challenge. But especially now being a mom, I think back and I think, gosh, what did I do with my time that I had before that I thought I didn't have, because you have to multitask in a way that I've never had to multitask before in my life, but I think it actually makes you more productive in some ways.
It does.
Because you really know you can't waste time that you wasted before, maybe scrolling or watching something silly or whatever.
So you really have to use you have a smaller window of time, so you have to use it really wisely.
I think you're right. And I think it is also addictive. I've been running around like a headless chicken today, but I wouldn't have it any other way. I love to be productive.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's just, I thought having a child, I didn't know how I'd feel in terms of going back to work and doing the things, but it's actually made me more driven to continue to do the work. And
Amazing.
yeah, it makes me, I mean, it's obviously a little bit harder now and I have to do things a little bit differently, but my drive to report, to go to these places, to do what I'm doing, it's as sort of fervent as ever, because you see what's happening in the world, and
I know there's
for
so
me
much.
being fortunate, very fortunate to be in a safe place with a roof above my head, and I never want to be too content, if that makes sense.
That's what I was thinking. Doing what you do, you must always be grateful for all the peace and security that we enjoy in our countries, and so many places around the world. Is just so difficult. So tell me, when did you actually start journalism, especially like war journalism?
So, I mean, really, journalism wasn't something I ever necessarily aspired to do. I don't know that I really knew any journalists growing up,
Okay.
and I was a ballerina, so I
Oh,
was
wow.
I loved to write, but I very much loved the creative side of things, and sort of thought I'd be going into something that was more artsy or ballet, and I ended up breaking my ankle when I was 18, so I went back to school. Still really wasn't sure what I was going to do. I was essentially studying filmmaking, but I didn't love it. And I ended up just sort of focusing more on my writing. And then I went to New York to finish my degree, and I randomly got this internship. And so it was at Fox in New York. And so you're sort of thrown into the beast of it all, where, number one news market in the world. And I was 20, turning 21, and they offered to sponsor me and hire me. And at
Oh,
that
wow.
point, digital was very new. And I think a lot of people, they all still wanted to be in broadcast. And so I thought, oh well, there's this opportunity to really be able to do something if I go to the digital space. So that really worked out for me, because as I said, I ended up being sponsored to work, and they wanted me in LA. And so that's how I sort of began my journalism career. And it was very much baptism by fire, because back then, it was 2007 that I moved to Los Angeles, and there was no real social media. So you really had to do the groundwork. There wasn't, sort of easy access
Yeah.
to online that there is now. And so that's how I kind of got my foray into general assignment. So being in Los Angeles, 1 minute you would be at the Oscars, the next minute you'd be at a courthouse covering a trial. So it was really just, it was so sporadic. Every day was so different. And I think it was sort of in my early 20s that the Iraq and Afghanistan wars were going on, and I just got really curious about what was happening. I was traveling a lot, just personally, and I just was fascinated by everything that I didn't know. And I thought, how do I not know that these places exist? How do I not know the dynamics of these places? How do I not know the way that the majority of the world lives? And I thought, gosh, if I don't know this stuff, then there's a good chance that most people around me don't know this stuff either. And I think that was really the driving factor. And then I was sort of really pushed and finagled my way, and I'm sure annoyed all of my bosses, because they were like, who is this girl? What is she doing? And insisting that I wanted to do these stories. And I did have a great mentor at the time. He was a British journalist by the name of Dominique didnt, and he'd been doing foreign correspondence for a long time, and he really just encouraged me to go for it. Unfortunately, Dom died almost 10 years ago now, but I just kind of did. I went for it, and once I started doing that work, I didn't want to do anything else, just nothing.
I can imagine.
You find that vocation in life, and you just... I fell in love with it, and nothing else that I could do could temper that or kind of live up to that.
So when is the first time that you actually visited Afghanistan?
Afghanistan, my first time there was in 2015.
2015. So was that during the first Taliban, or was it what was
No,
happening
so
then?
that was sort of I mean, the US was still
Okay.
obviously sort of in charge there, and
Oh
they
yes, of course.
were
2010
yeah
they took, isn't it? Yeah.
they were winding down this sort of big mission into a smaller mission that was handing it over to the US government. But it was essentially, the US was sort of still running the show at that point. I mean, there was still a lot of fighting. The Taliban was still kind of coming back and larger than life. But I think there was a sense of downplaying a little bit, and there was a sense that maybe the Afghan government could sort of stand on its own, but I think that was very much just propped up by foreign government and foreign resources.
Yeah. I had the opportunity to speak with a professor, Dr. Toki from Pakistan, and we discussed the historic events of Afghanistan, from the Soviet invasion all the way more or less up until now. But we didn't really get a chance to explore the current situation in Afghanistan, which is what I was hoping to speak to you about, because apart from other things, I've noticed that you've also published a book recently about the situation in Afghanistan post the American withdrawal. Is that right?
Yeah, so I was actually living there during the fall, and I think I'm really one of the few journalists that stayed. I think most people evacuated out, or they had to evacuate out under their company's sort of insurance policy. But being freelance at the time, I had freedom to kind of make my own decisions, and my decision at the time was that the story is really just beginning, and I need to continue to tell it.
Wow. And how did you ensure your safety in that situation with nothing is stable, everything is fluid, no one knows what's going on?
I don't think you can ever really ensure your safety. I think you just have to make the best of the worst decisions in any situation sometimes. You have to make calculated, smart decisions. You have to weigh up the pros and the cons and the risks and know what you're getting into. And go with your gut. At the end of the day, it's that intuition that really, I think, keeps us alive.
Yeah. Were you surprised how quickly American withdrawal happened from
Yeah,
Southend?
absolutely. I mean, it was so quick, and I think this sort of speaks to a lot of the failings of intelligence and everything that was sort of happening on the ground. So when I was there that week, sort of before it fell, I was flying to Mazar, and I, under the invitation of General Dostum, who was, supposedly there with his troops, holding back the Talibs in the sort of Uzbek area. And I spoke to officials that I knew in the Ministry of Intelligence, the MOD, and they said, yeah, of course, it's going to be safe. There's no way that, that particular pocket's going to fall. Kabul's never going to fall. But, because at that point, some of the provinces had, but they were very much adamant that it's fine. And so I went about my business, and really right up until a couple of hours before it fell, they were still telling me the same thing when I, started to become very concerned, because I could see what was happening on the ground. I could see people fleeing. I could see people, they were lining up at the banks, trying to get their money out, doing whatever they could to orchestrate a way out of there and try to head toward Kabul as sort of a last resort, because Mazar fell the day before Kabul. It was the Saturday. Kabul fell on the Sunday afternoon.
Oh,
And
really?
so,
Did Mazar actually fall before Kabul?
yeah.
So it kind of came
Yeah,
from
it did.
north down to south.
Yeah, Kabul was pretty much, I guess once Kabul fell, it was all over. But, so that was the Saturday, and I remember, and things, everything was shut, and you have a feeling, what's going on, and people weren't sort of returning my calls, and it was just, you could sense that things were bad, and things were shifting very fast, and right up until a couple of hours before that happened, which was sort of early that evening, I mean, I was still being told the same thing. Oh, you're fine. You should be able to make it on your flight, which was Monday. My flight, of course, that was canceled straight away as the second it fell. But, so it just sort of spoke to me about the lack of coherence, or the lack of a willingness to really look at the picture, maybe, and assess things accurately. So, I mean, it was all very fast, and certainly, much quicker than I expected. By a long shot. I certainly didn't think it was going to happen not within a matter of sort of a few days, let alone I thought it would be a few months in my prediction.
Where were you in Afghanistan around about that time?
Do you mean when it fell?
Yes. Were you in Kabul or were you?
I was in Mazar.
You were in Mazar.
So so I was sort of stranded in Mazar. I mean, with not really any, too many opportunities. Unlike Kabul, I mean, there was obviously resources and things there, but in Mazar, it was sort of a little bit of a you're on your own, figure it out.
Before we go any further, let me just take a moment to introduce our sponsors for today. Today's episode is proudly sponsored by the Worldwide Listings Company Limited, or WLC for short. WLC is a leading e-commerce management agency helping businesses succeed online. So whether it's looking for new products, supplier sourcing, account creation, creating listings, keyword research, image editing, video creation, or managing your PPC campaigns and advertising, WLC can provide a complete A to Z package that is tailored around your specific needs. So whether you're new at the e-commerce game or an established business wanting to take your sales to the next level, get in touch. WLC is here to help and support you every step of the way. Now, for transparency, let me also explain my own relationship with WLC. I'm actually the founder and the managing director of this fantastic company. So that means that I'm actually placed in a unique position where I can offer you a brilliant deal today. So if you are interested in e-commerce and you feel that you may benefit from some help in managing your account, then get in touch and we can offer you 1 month management with 0 fees. So you'll be getting 30 days of expert work for absolutely no cost to you at all. Simply, when you speak with someone, just quote Kianistan and I will personally make sure that you're well looked after. The number to dial is 0044 203 818 5666. Again, that's 0044 203 818 5666. You can also reach us at that number using WhatsApp, or you can reach us at www.worldwidelistings.co.uk. That's all one word, www.worldwidelistings.co.uk. Thank you, and let's get back to the podcast. And also, so after the US withdrawal, you remained in Afghanistan for another 4 months or so. What's your experience witnessing firsthand the emergence of the Taliban? How do you see it all? Is it an here we go again? Do you think anything's changed in terms of the attitude of the Taliban movement, the Taliban themselves? Have they matured?
I think at first, in that first month, I'd say there was a semblance of hope, maybe that things were going to be different than they were in the 90s. The Taliban tried to certainly portray this sense of openness, willingness, hence why they gave me permission to be there and stay. They wanted reporters to come in. They wanted stories. I think that they thought that they could really change the international narrative that people had of the Taliban. And I think, and I certainly tried to be as open-minded as I could in listening and trying to piece together what was happening. And certainly that first month, there was a huge sort of amount of freedom. And they, sort of pretended that they were going to be a lot different than they were. But I think that quickly disintegrated. And really after that first month, you started to see crackdown in the sense of them just not being allowed to do interviews anymore. You started just everything changed, I think.
Why was that, do you think? Was that because of they were surprised by the attitude of the global community, that they didn't get the response they were expecting?
I do. I think that was definitely part of it. I think that they thought that everybody would suddenly, the Taliban has never been formally recognized, and that's what they want. That's what they're desperate for, to be legitimized on the world stage, and that's something that they've never been able to achieve. And so I think they thought that they would get that. And I think fairly quickly realized that probably wasn't going to happen. So there was no point trying to, appease the situation. So whatever Supreme Leader says goes. I think there was sort of a fair bit of it, or there is still a fair bit of infighting between different factions of the Taliban in terms of what kind of hardline rule to go with. And I think that they very quickly just kind of gave up and were like, we're going to do what we're going to do, and sort of went back to a lot of their draconian policies. And I did actually go back to Afghanistan in 2022.
Okay.
And it was a very, even in the time, since I'd left, it has become an increasingly repressive place. And so, and I can only imagine, now that it's gotten significantly worse, even since then. So I think just sort of bit by bit, they're certainly returning to their sort of standard. I think they held off a lot. Yeah, in the beginning, held off on things like public floggings or executions or stoning, things that were very commonplace with the Talibs in the 90s. I think they held off on that. But
yeah.
I think sort of as time has gone on, they've slowly brought back a lot of those policies.
Is this a completely new generation of the Taliban, or is there are some of the top leadership the same as what we had before under Mullah Omar?
Yeah, I think a lot of it is still the same. A lot of those men are still alive. They're still kicking. They're still, they're still hanging on. So I think they still have a lot of say. And in some ways, the younger Taliban, they're not really any different. They've lived very sheltered lives, often in small villages. Have gone to, sort of Taliban instituted madrasas.
Yeah.
So their way of thinking is still very much the same. And I think that, despite being a younger generation, I don't think that they're necessarily any more open or wise than their elders.
I think maybe one of the biggest challenges the Taliban are facing and are going to likely to be facing is that they're cash starved, and how are they going to run the economy of the country? At the end of the first Taliban era, they were pretty much had a opium trade and everything pretty much established. So as bad as that was, it was something that they were successfully managing. But how are they managing the economy now? Like, what's going on in terms of the finances?
Well, to be honest, the Taliban is certainly imperfect and corrupt, but I think that there's nowhere near the scale of corruption that existed under the previous government. Really, the previous government, and to me, that was really the root cause of Afghanistan's downfall, was the level of corruption. And you think about more than 80% of what was coming into the country was all foreign aid, so from the US, from other NGOs, and so there was just so much there was so much there to steal, and it became so systemic on every possible level, really from the top to the bottom. Anyone who could get a piece of something was going to get it, and that, to me, that was the rot in the system, and that's why things never happen. I mean, people could pay. If someone could get a grant for $100 million to build a road, they would take most of that, maybe subcontract to someone, and then in the end of the day, some cheap materials were coming in from China with cheap labor, and the road fell apart in 2 months. But it just, that was the way it was. And so I certainly think, obviously, the money there to sort of steal isn't there with the Taliban, but also that I think that was one of the things that maybe they won people over with in the beginning, was this sort of promise to be less corrupt. And I certainly, in my experience there, haven't seen the same levels of corruption as I did in previous government. So therefore, that's already kind of one step, so to speak, in a better economic direction. But because of that corruption not existing so prevalently, Taliban has been much more successful at instigating taxes, things like you pay for parking in Kabul now, which was unheard of before, or if you did, it was more just a bribe. So there's a lot more taxes. People kind of have to pay their way a lot more, and the Taliban has been a little bit more successful. In the past, that would have just gone into somebody's pockets. Now that the Taliban can, sort of perhaps use that a little bit more to actually run a country. So obviously the economy there is terrible, but I think that they are finding creative ways to keep things alive.
That's really interesting. It's kind of a little bit reflection of how they entered the first time around when there was so much violence and corruption everywhere. So despite the Taliban's obvious shortcomings, people thought that at least it will bring stability.
And that's what Mullah Omar, that's what he promised. That's how he would sort of go to these villages and promise people that all these, corrupt, whoever was in power, that he was going to come in and be their savior. And that narrative still, I think, has prevailed.
Exactly. Before we go any further, let me just take a moment to introduce our sponsors for today. Today's episode is proudly sponsored by the Worldwide Listings Company Limited, or WLC for short. WLC is a leading e-commerce management agency helping businesses succeed online. So whether it's looking for new products, supplier sourcing, account creation, creating listings, keyword research, image editing, video creation, or managing your PPC campaigns and advertising, WLC can provide a complete A to Z package that is tailored around your specific needs. So whether you're new at the e-commerce game or an established business wanting to take your sales to the next level, get in touch. WLC is here to help and support you every step of the way. Now, for transparency, let me also explain my own relationship with WLC. I'm actually the founder and the managing director of this fantastic company. So that means that I'm actually placed in a unique position where I can offer you a brilliant deal today. So if you are interested in e-commerce and you feel that you may benefit from some help in managing your account, then get in touch and we can offer you 1 month management with 0 fees. So you'll be getting 30 days of expert work for absolutely no cost to you at all. Simply, when you speak with someone, just quote Kianistan and I will personally make sure that you're well looked after. The number to dial is 0044 203 818 5666. Again, that's 0044 203 818 5666. You can also reach us at that number using WhatsApp, or you can reach us at www.worldwidelistings.co.uk. That's all one word, www.worldwidelistings.co.uk. Thank you, and let's get back to the podcast. Also, I was reading that I think you've been fortunate enough to interview most of the main stakeholders within Afghanistan and maybe even in the region, the surrounding countries. Is that right, first of all?
I mean, I guess everyone has a different definition of stakeholders, but I've certainly tried to see things from as many perspectives as possible.
Yeah. So what do you think, like, from your experience, what do you think is the ultimate solution for the ongoing constant conflict within Afghanistan? Do you see any light at the end of the tunnel?
And this is a hard, and I don't think there's a right answer, and maybe my answer will sound harsh, but at the end of the day, nobody can come in and save Afghanistan.
Mm-hmm.
And certainly people have tried over the decades, the centuries. Afghans have to do this themselves. And I think what was most shocking to me during that fall period was seeing people run away the way that they did.
Yeah.
It was heartbreaking, to be honest. And I remember just seeing people just leave a base, in the days before the fall and just walk off. And I remember asking soldiers, "What are you doing?" And they said, "We're leaving." And I thought, this is not how it works. And I thought, they have access to so many $1 million worth of billions of dollars worth of equipment, of training, of resources that countries like Ukraine would just, would beg for. Afghanistan had all of that, and they abandoned that because they didn't, at the end of the day, I mean, the blunt assessment is you didn't want to fight. And yes, your leader sold you out. Yes, there was corruption. Yes, there was all of that. But at the end of the day, if the people on the ground are not willing to fight, to stand up, to rally, there's no winning, and nobody can come in and fight for you. The Americans can't do that. Russians can't do that. You have to fight yourself, and I don't know if or when or what it will take, but that has to be an Afghan job at this point. I just don't think there is a way that any sort of foreigners can come in. I think if Afghanistan is willing to, if the men of Afghanistan are willing to stand up in masses, that is the only way. And I don't know if we'll ever see that anytime soon.
Do you think the regional powers, Iran, Pakistan, other countries, even India, are they allowing space for the Afghans to come to their own solutions, or do we still have that continuous kind of interference from outside that makes fractionalism even more prevalent within the country?
I think just Afghanistan geographically, it's always going to have interferences. I mean, Iran is always going to want a piece of their pie. Pakistan certainly would. The Saudis have got interest. The United States has got interest. Russia has got interest. So there's certainly many powerful regional players that are going to want to have a stake of Afghanistan. And I think, that's been the Taliban mandate, is that they're going to be the ones in control and not let foreign forces come in and meddle and dictate. And so I think you see that even with the China relationship. I know initially there was sort of a lot of talk of China taking over Bagram, China running this, China doing that. And I don't think we've really seen that to the degree that I think a lot of people anticipated or predicted. It was like, China is basically going to own Afghanistan. I don't think that is the case. I think that was really overblown. And I think that is one thing sort of the Taliban has been fairly, that's sort of their number one policy, is they don't want outsiders coming in and telling them what to do.
And in some ways, I think that's probably something that gives me hope that ultimately they are proud and they do want to have their own, run their own affairs. They can't figure out how to do it so far, but an organization like the Taliban that has control over the whole country, I think in some ways that will bring a level of stability. What do you think about foreign investment? Did you see any signs of investment coming? Especially, I'm also thinking about what's going on in the region in terms of the BRIC nations coming closer together and the location, geographical importance of Afghanistan. Do you think there's a chance that Afghanistan might be pulled into the embrace of the BRICS nation, and that might be a blessing or a curse, depending on how they manage it?
I mean, you think about it now, not a single country has, even ones that have, that still have an embassy or whatever, a representative in Kabul, none of them have actually officially have made official diplomatic ties with the Taliban. So Taliban is still an absolute pariah on the world stage, and not even, Russia is or China or any of these countries, Pakistan, that none of them have made a formal diplomatic ties. So I don't see Afghanistan being legitimized into something like
that's true
BRICS anytime soon. I know we've been talking about, BRICS from a sort of a foreign policy point of view for a really long time, 15 years, and I don't think it's come to be the powerhouse that Leon Panetta and other people kind of warned of back in 2011. That's not to say it won't, but I don't see sort of that being necessarily a rival to sort of the US power anytime soon. But I don't also see BRICS necessarily embracing Afghanistan economically yet. I think they have a long way to go. I think they'd certainly have to establish some sort of foothold and formal ties before anyone is going to kind of welcome them in. But that's not to say that private enterprise, and I think certainly when I was there last, the Taliban was sort of hankering for that, basically, trying to do PR, telling me that they'll even accept infidels. Really, that was the word they used. We'll even accept infidels to come here and have an agreement if they're willing to, do right by us. But I think it's a for countries like the US and Britain and other places, it's a little precarious doing business with the Taliban. just because you don't know what you're going to get or what sanctions are going to kind of come
Yeah.
after you. But I think for companies like China or Pakistan, I mean, they have pre-existing deals for resources, and I think we'll probably continue to see those grow. Places like Mazinak, China's had that contract for that copper mine since 2008. It hasn't really built
Yeah.
upon it because of security. It's set to run out, I think, in 2030 or something. But I think whether or not China builds upon that, we'll see. I mean, from my last sort of engagement about that, the Afghans were not happy about the terms of that pre-existing deal under the previous government. So, Taliban could also just rip that up too and say, hey, that was an old government. They were not legitimate.
True.
We're not going to do this. But I think that they recognize they don't have the skills to dig deep into that mine. So I think for them, it's a push for a win-win, providing they don't feel like they're being told what to do or that their
Yeah.
resources are being plundered.
Do you know if that contract, that mining, is it still operational? Are the Chinese still mining there, or has the work ceased?
No, it never really got off the ground. So it never really got off the ground. So they got the contract, which 2008, and then the security situation was so precarious that they never actually I think they did a few assessments, but never sent a team in and actually started the work. And then there was a lot of talk after the fall that maybe now was the time that they were going to start, but we haven't really seen signs of that. So I think there's just a lot of, I think there's still a lot of nervousness from Beijing about actually going through with that, despite the value that copper has. I mean, going back 2008 or beginning of the invasion, there really wasn't, we didn't have the electric cars, we didn't have the mobile phones, we didn't have all these things that run our life. So the value of copper back then wasn't really that big of a deal. Now it's a huge deal. It's the lifeline of everything we do. So I'm sure China would be looking for the best way to go in if they can get those security guarantees. And I don't know, with the presence of ISIS, with the infighting with the Taliban, there's still a lot of suicide bombings that happen in Afghanistan. We don't hear about it because it doesn't make the news anymore.
Mm-hmm.
But the situation there is still very unsteady. So I don't know that China is going to get those security reassurances to kind of go forth with those projects.
True. I have connections in Pakistan. That's kind of where I belong ethnically. So personally, I think I find it interesting how things will pan out between Pakistan and Afghanistan, the Taliban movement now. I think that's going to be quite interesting because they have legitimate concerns on both sides. But at the same time, I don't think that they can kind of go on very long without actually having some kind of a mutual understanding and agreement for both their sakes. So I think that's going to be interesting.
No country can exist in isolation.
Exactly.
I think Afghanistan certainly is going to want to shore up whatever partnerships it can get.
What's going on between the ISIS presence in Afghanistan and also this whole Khorasan movement? Because we quite often hear about ISIS and the Taliban loggerheads with each other, having battles.
Yeah, I mean, they're certainly not friends. And I think there was a narrative sort of in the West for a long time about the Taliban and ISIS cooperating. I certainly never saw any signs of that. Everything I saw was very much, those two, as you said, at loggerheads. I think ISIS it's definitely an insurgency that exists, but it's what's the word? It's a very much a nuisance and a dangerous nuisance. I mean, it certainly can orchestrate bombings in all sorts of places and cost lives. And I think the Taliban tries to pretend that ISIS doesn't exist, or likes to just sort of dismiss it as just being a bit of a rebel group, but and doesn't want to acknowledge that it is a force to be reckoned with, and it, whilst it's not going to unseat them, I think, from power, it's certainly going to cause them a lot of headache, and that's and they've continued to do that over the course of the last few years. And I think that the Taliban doesn't sort of have the resources or the know-how to eliminate ISIS. And I mean, gosh, the US tried to, and it could neither. So, I mean, this is very much a reality for that part of the world that groups like these do exist. And I think that that especially I think as the Taliban goes on and people become frustrated with, whatever they see as a government that's not functioning, or they're living in poverty, and that's what drives extremism. That's what drives people to want change. And groups like ISIS can come in and swoop in and take take recruitment from that. So I think we'll certainly be seeing a lot more of that as time goes on.
That's true. I can kind of see regional powers wanting to irritate the Taliban, maybe use ISIS as a leverage. But I don't see the Taliban and ISIS being natural allies now or in the future. I think the Taliban are a fundamentalist Islamic kind of movement that has ambitions only within the borders of Afghanistan, whereas ISIS is like an ideological global movement that has less to do with day-to-day core beliefs of Islam and more to do with the ideology and politics. What do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. They think very differently. And ISIS has these sort of caliphate ideals, and Taliban is not focused on the rest of the world outside of Afghanistan. That's why they were never formally designated as a foreign terrorist organization, because they didn't have global ambitions the way that Al Qaeda and ISIS have. It's funny. I actually interviewed some ISIS fighters when I was in Afghanistan, and they were in Bagram prison. And then when the fall happened, they were released and went home, and the ones that I met were in Kunduz, and they were just happily rejoining and going about their way, and happily talking about whatever plans they had to attack. And it was just interesting to me that I guess in the Taliban's furor to give amnesty or show that they changed, that they'd let out all these ISIS fighters to basically just go back to their homes and regroup and continue their mission. So that was a little bizarre.
Wow. I think this is a continuous thing that I notice in Afghanistan, that today's bitter enemies can be just overnight become allies and then enemies again. So things can change very quickly in Afghanistan.
Yeah, and I think what people also don't realize about Afghanistan is that you could, in one family, you can have a member that's a Taliban, another one works, was a soldier at the ANA, another one is ISIS, another one is, just everyone, and this is all existing in one family. So things are not as linear as people want them to be. They're not as straightforward and black and white. There's just a lot of mixed dynamics, and motivations for being part of these groups are always very varied.
Exactly. Do you think, are the Taliban committed to holding elections in Afghanistan? Is that in the horizon?
No, I would say no. They're not interested in that. That's a version of democracy that they don't think is, necessary. Necessary, or maybe that's infidel behavior. They have a supreme leader. They have all these interim leaders who are certainly not going anywhere, and I find it. Yeah, there's very little to show me the Taliban has any interest in having a proper election that would, be a legitimate way for the people to choose. And quite frankly, I don't know that how many people want to go out and choose between this Talib and that Talib. There's certainly no room. There's no room for opposition.
Do you have any plans of visiting Afghanistan in the near future?
I mean, I would love to. I just don't think the Taliban are welcoming me back anytime soon.
Really?
Yeah, I mean, I'm certainly, I'm certainly open to trying, but it did become really difficult to work there last time I was there. It was really hard for my fixer. They threatened him and his family, so he's not sort of comfortable doing work with media anymore, and so that was disappointing. And so I think it'd be hard to find the right fixer that wasn't the Taliban themselves. So and I don't know that as a journalist I would be able to tell the best stories with the Taliban fixer. That's not really what I would want to go and see. But I mean, I'm certainly not. I'd certainly love to go back if I could. I'm just not sure that logistically. I think most journalists I know have been kicked out for one reason or another, and I don't think they're particularly open to people coming back.
This is so interesting and so fascinating. There's so many other things I wanted to talk to you about Afghanistan, but also I realized, I think after Afghanistan, you had the opportunity to spend some time in Ukraine as well. What other conflict zones are kind of you're studying at the moment? Are you involved in what's going on in Palestine and Iran and all of that, Middle East?
Yeah, I mean, that'll happen. I mean, that literally happened sort of a week after I had my baby. So, unfortunately, I couldn't get on the ground to that one, and I would like to in the future. I've worked in the region previously, but I mean, again, it's very hard because you can't get access to Gaza. So again, you're sort of in a situation where I feel like you can't get that full picture, and I think that's really disappointing, and it's hard, for my colleagues that are covering that to not be able to get that access and to give the story justice, because I think um, so many narratives are twisted, so many things get, there's just so many different inaccuracies, and I think that just comes down to the inability to really be on the ground and do what journalists should be doing. But I certainly, I hope to get there, and I'm also very interested in places that we don't see on the news a lot, that aren't getting sort of the headline coverage the way that maybe Middle East and Ukraine are right now. But I mean, what's happening in Darfur, it was sort of a return of the genocide there is heartbreaking. You've also got things happening in, long-running horrible atrocities happening in Burma or Myanmar, the Gulf. Yeah, I mean, everything with drug cartels in Latin America that's right in the US sort of backyard, which I think is terribly fascinating and disturbing, and again, innocent people that are caught in the crossfire. So I think there is incredible stories to look at no matter where you are. And having said that, it doesn't always have to be a war zone either. I think you can. For me, it's always very much about the human story, the human rights, the innocent people that are suffering, and I think those stories exist everywhere.
Have you been to Pakistan recently, or any plans?
Not recently. I was there in 2018, and again, I tried to go back there when I was in Afghanistan, and they didn't want me. That's the tough bit of being a war reporter, is you tend to piss a lot of people off sometimes. The truth hurts, and
let me know when you're next planning. I might be able to help.
I have some great, Pakistani friends of mine in California, and I've enjoyed my time reporting there. But some individuals didn't like me so much, but I would love to go back. So I will let you know. I will seek your help.
Also, the government's changed now as well, I think, since then. Kashmir would be another area I would love your
I did visit Kashmir when I was there.
Wow.
But I would love to go back, and again, I think it's important to try to look at it from both sides too, and get as many perspectives as possible. And it's hard because there's so much information coming out of there. We don't know what's true, what's false, what is happening, what's not. And so I do think that is another important part of the world as well that needs more attention.
Is it just me? I can't remember the last time the world had gone so crazy. I mean, there's so many conflicts that are like threatening all of humanity, really, and all of them happening at the same time, and I can't see any end to them. Have you experienced anything like this before, or is this a new kind of a era we're going into?
I mean, I think every generation probably has similar things to say about maybe what's happening. I guess, following Vietnam, there was a quiet period for a little while where it didn't seem so much. But at the same time, I'm hesitant to say that, because at the same time, there was still, mass starvation. There was very much the beginnings of genocide. So I think if you look back in every decade, there's been, if not one, but two major wars. I think you look back to the 1980s, you had the Iran-Iraq War, you had Pol Pot in Cambodia, you had atrocities happening, in North Korea, in so many other parts of the world. So I think there's always been chaos, and there's always been conflict.
The nuclear dynamics, it kind of makes things that much more scary. I mean, how many times Russia has threatened nuclear attacks, same with Israel, between India and Pakistan. I think those things are maybe something that's slightly different now.
It is. I mean, it is terrifying. And I think we see, whether it's Iran or Saudi Arabia or there's many
Yes.
other countries that I'm sure have grandiose plans to build
Yeah.
their own weapons. The countries that have them, grandiose plans to upgrade and expand their existing capabilities. And so it certainly adds a frightening dimension to warfare.
Exactly. Holly, I'm so grateful for your time, especially I know you're kind of doing your motherly duties, looking after your child. She's behaved so well. So thank her. Um, I'd love to invite you over again one day if you're able to. Um, before I let you go, is there? Do you want to share any? If anyone wants to get in touch with you, or any of your work, or your website, or anything like that?
Yeah, my website is my name. It's holliemckay.com. It's HOLLIEMCKAY.com. And my Instagram, I post a lot of my content and things there. And that is just my name, Hollie S. McKay, all one word. And yeah, please follow me there. Please reach out, send me messages. I also have a Substack, so please subscribe because that's where I put out a lot of content and stories and kind of try to explain, maybe complex issues a little bit in a more simplified way. So please, I love feedback. I love engaging. So please reach out.
Definitely, and thank you. And I will make sure I include all of that in the notes as well.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you for joining us.
Anytime.